If I'm to take seriously a theistic hypothesis, I have to deal with things that are part of it, judgment, heaven, hell,
Right.
things that are criticized by many modern philosophers or ordinary people. How do you deal with those subjects?
I think the subjects you mentioned are very, very important and significant, and they're about really the fulfillment of what the purpose of creation is. Let me say, first of all, that I believe that God's love and mercy is not time limited. That when we die, a curtain doesn't come down. If we're caught on the wrong side of that curtain, God says, too bad, you had your chance, now off with you. I think that God's offer of love and mercy will always be there, but I also think that the decisions and actions that we take in this life will shape our characters, and if we turn away from God, particularly if we do so consciously in this life, that is spiritually damaging, or will make it more difficult to respond to God's offer of mercy and love beyond.
What you're saying, at least regarding the traditional doctrine of hell, is somewhat different. The normal inconsistency that one would think with a hell is people would be punished eternally for something that they did, however terrible, temporarily.
Yes, I think that is an incredible picture, and it's not one that I share. So, but I need to get first of all into judgment before I get to hell. And judgment, I think, is not appearing before a testy celestial judge who is anxious to throw you into prison and torture as quickly as possible. It is an encounter with reality. I think judgment is seeing ourselves as we really are. And that will be a painful experience for us, because we shall find all sorts of dross and misshapenness in our lives. And we'll have to come to terms with that and allow God to reshape us in ways that are true fulfillment. That's what judgment is. It is an encounter with reality, not a sentence of punishment.
But this is a temporal process as opposed to a specific instant?
I think it will be a process, yes. I think that's right, because I think that's how God works. They're not in a blinding flash of illumination. In fact, it will be so painful for most of us to see what we are that we shall have to encounter it step by step. I believe then the question is, I think that nobody will be turned away from the kingdom of heaven who wishes to enter it. Nobody who wishes to enter into the exploration of the inexhaustible riches of the divine nature will be denied that option. But equally, I think nobody will be carried kicking and screaming into the divine presence against their will. And there may be people who will resist God's offer of mercy and love forever. And if there are such people, then they are the people who are in hell. And the tragedy of hell is that they're there by their choice, not because they've been thrown there against their will, but by their choice. And I believe that the color of hell is not red for torment, but grey for boredom. In fact, the best picture I know of hell is not Dante's Inferno, which I don't like very much with its successive torture chambers, but C.S. Lewis's picture in The Great Divorce. Hell is a grey, dreary place lost down a crack in the floor of heaven. And from time to time, people there are allowed to come on a bus trip up to heaven to see whether they like it or not. And on the whole, sadly, they don't like it because it's too real for them. The grass cuts their feet. They meet somebody against whom they've nurtured a lifelong grudge. That person says, come on, let's be reconciled now. They say, no, I don't want to do that. So at the end of the day, most of them go back to that grey, dreary town at the end of the day. That's hell. The doors of hell, as the preachers say, are locked on the inside to keep the life of God out, rather than on the outside to keep the sinners in there. That's my picture of hell. My picture of heaven is the unending exploration of the inexhaustible riches of the divine nature unveiled before us. And if finite human beings are really to come to know the infinite reality of God, that's going to be a unending step-by-step process. So the life of heaven isn't going to be boring. It isn't going to be just sitting on a cloud strumming a harp and shouting out hallelujahs and things like that. It's going to be this deeply fulfilling and unending exploration of divine richness.
Certainly the vast majority of human beings are not coherent in their religious belief, even in terms of any religious belief.
Sure,
I mean, in today's world, there are multiple billions of people who have different views than anyone in the Western monotheism, certainly Christianity. What do we make of the vast numbers of people who never knew God or never had any knowledge one way or the other?
Well, I think we feel that they should not be excluded from the possibility of heaven. And if we feel that, we are sufficiently compassionate to feel that, I think that God will feel that even more strongly so. I mean, God knows the circumstances in which people live. And God knows all sorts of circumstances that make it difficult in this life for people to hear the message of God's love. If you've been abused by your father as a child, the message of the fatherhood of God would not be an instantly attractive message to receive. God knows that, and God will somehow take that into account. I don't know how that's going to be done, but I can leave that to a God who is both just and merciful.
But let's explore what it means for judgment to be a process,
right,
rather than a sentence.
Right. Yeah.
Does that mean we or other people who've never heard God have to live some sort of an analogous physical life to learn more?
Well, I think all human life, true human life, is embodied life. I think that we shall not be embodied in the matter of this world, otherwise we should be going to die again, but we shall be in some sort of continually existing matter which just doesn't have a drift towards transience and decay. And I think that there will be an exploratory process. I believe very strongly, actually, in some notion of purgatory. I mean, purgatory got a bad name in the late Middle Ages because it was so abused and so on by the church. And the idea that you could pay money and people would get released, I mean, that's blasphemous, quite apart from being theological nonsense. But that there is a process by which we are purified and which we come to greater and greater terms of acknowledgement of the reality of God, that seems to me very likely. Much as I dislike Dante's Inferno, I like the Purgatorio, the mountain at which people work their way up. At each level of the mountain, they are purged from one of the seven deadly sins. And every time somebody moves from one level to the next, the whole mountain shakes with alleluias. And people praise that step taken nearer the divine presence. That's a very positive and, to me, deeply moving image of a destiny.
And might that include all of humanity in this process?
Of course, yes, absolutely. All of humanity who wish to be part of that process. Sure. I say there may be people who will resist God forever, in which case they have shut themselves out of it. And they're in grey, dreary old hell, not because God has lost patience with them, but because they have resisted. There may not be people who resist God forever. I mean, many people have thought that in the end the divine love will not be defeated in any case, but let's hope that's so.
Forever is a long time.
Forever is a long time, yes. Yes, it is a long time. Yes, yes.
This process that will go on would involve billions of people in some way.
Yes. But I think that it's up to God to work that out. I mean, I think that mere numbers can never vitiate God's love and salvific activity. If we can imagine how God might draw one person into the divine presence and the divine life, then we can imagine how God can do that for billions. Or at least we can believe that God could do that for billions, even if we can't actually literally imagine that process. I mean, we get bemused by large numbers, but that's because we're finite beings.